It's lovely to welcome back Professor Prof T V Paul to CPPR and also some of our senior fellows today. We gathered here for a very interesting lecture on the topic Resurging Great Power Politics, Conflicts and Regional Orders and Implications for South Asia. Professor T V Paul is an erudite distinguished fellow at CPPR. He is the James Medal Professor of International Relations in the Department of Political Science at McGill University, Montreal, Canada, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Dr. Paul specializes in international relations, especially international security, regional security, and South Asia. He completed his master's in political science from Maharaja's College, Erudite. His MPhil in international studies from Jawaharlal University, New Delhi, and his PhD in political science from the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Paul is the author or editor of 20 books, nearly 75 journal articles and book chapters, and has lectured at various international universities and research institutions. In March 2019, Dr. Paul took the leadership role in forming the Global Research Network on Peaceful Change. He was elected as the 56th President of the International Studies Association, and on March 17, 2016, he took charge as the IAC President for 2016-2017. It's a pleasure to welcome you back, Professor T V Paul.
Thank you.
I request you to take over the presentation.
Okay. That picture is about 20 years old. I don't know why it shows up, but I feel like guilty that I have to remove it from my webpage. It makes me too young. At heart, I'm young, though. That's good. It's wonderful to see these senior colleagues and junior colleagues and all colleagues that you came this morning. And I always wanted to visit your office, which never happened because you're always having a program in some five-star hotel or other, so it's a challenge. So I'm on a tour of Kerala, basically invited by the Kerala State Higher Education Council as the first Brain Gain Visiting Scholar. It's a program that invites expatriate Malayalis, with some distinction, I guess, to help set up programs, engage students, meet people who have no chance to go abroad or interact. So I'm going to some 20 colleges, but mostly I'm attached to MG University's School in IR program. Visited Thiruvananthapuram and quite a few schools so far, and onward to Kottayam, then I go to Northern Kerala too. So it's been fun, very tiring, but engaging and meeting college students in particular who have shown much affection toward me, which was nice. They want to hear more about opportunities, how I got where I am in terms of whatever achievements I have. And so I feel it's coming back home and feel like being with you is great. So this topic is actually some general thoughts only. I haven't written on it. I'm still thinking about it, but it's a very related topic that I'm working on, great power conflicts in the contemporary world, re-emergence of great power conflicts, differences between Cold War era and the contemporary world. So let me start by saying that what's happening in Ukraine is two norms are contesting. Norms are standards of behavior, expectations about right and wrong. One is what we call the great power norm of spheres of influence. Great powers, mostly European great powers since 16th, 17th centuries, developed this idea that the immediate neighborhood of theirs is the sphere of influence. Sometimes, if they are a global hegemonic power, they would want a much bigger sphere of influence. The United States considers Asia Pacific as its sphere of influence, although the Monroe Doctrine stated that no power can come and interfere in the affairs of the Americas. So, the other great powers generally concede or oppose the sphere of influence, usually after a world war or big wars. But that is often a big problem. So the sphere of influence was contested by non-great power states, and especially since the decolonization period after World War II, the other norm has emerged. Of course, before that, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, non-intervention, territorial integrity norm. This integrity norm is based on the idea that, it's a Westphalian idea, states are equal, that no one should have extraordinary powers, and that they should be allowed to stay independent from both external and internal interventions. Now, newly arriving states from disbandment of empires tend to have a tough time with the previous empires to coexist. We know that in the previous dissolution of Soviet Union, and before that, of course, the World Wars generated new power equations. But so these newly created states want to retain their sovereignty and sovereign independence. And so there is this tension between these two norms, and I think that is a big part of this current conflict from a normative point of view. The problem is 1991 settlement, you want to call it the end of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union gave it up and then disbanded itself. The Russians don't think they lost the war, the Cold War. But the West, in particular the United States, thought they did lose. Otherwise they wouldn't have disbanded so fast. And there were, as you know, quite a few understanding among Gorbachev, even Yeltsin and others, that the United States and the West won't expand NATO to other regional states, including Ukraine. And that has been broken, you know that. So the sphere of influence for Russia is now challenged, or was now challenged in a big way, that they didn't have the capacity to resist. And here comes Ukraine with the desire to retain independence and join the European Union and eventually NATO. So there is on the one hand, NATO and the European Union want to preserve the Western Pacific Liberal Union, which is very attractive for many of these ex-republics. When Czech Republic joined the NATO, the church bells tolled the whole day. It was like a big emotional thing to join the West, because they were under Soviet yoke for so long. And they all benefited economically. Go to the Baltic states, they look very modern. Same with all the Hungary, Czech Republic, compared to former Soviet republics. So there is a material desire to be part of the Western sphere and then become democracies to some extent. So here, the arrival of this war, obviously the international system was reconfiguring. The US took withdrawal from Afghanistan. There was a sense that perhaps the US won't be able to assist, or the West won't be able to resist this Soviet incursion. And so the Soviet incursion is actually an effort by Mr. Yeltsin to bring back some kind of glorious days, to challenge this Western expansionism. And he had amassed enough wealth and weapons for short-term victorious war. And I think the problem is he miscalculated rather poorly the determination of the Ukrainians to fight back. We know that he thought Ukraine would collapse within a few days. The regime, the people will revolt against the regime, and somehow there will be an easy victory. This is not new for great powers. In all the most important wars of the past, let's say 50 years, the great powers go in with this expectation of short war, and then they basically lose, or they create such havoc for this target state, enormous human tragedy, and then they get away with murder, because great power status gives them a halo around them, and no one can challenge them. So Mr. Putin, I know in India he has got a lot of sympathizers, and I understand there are some reasons to sympathize. But what he is doing is, he wants to bring the imperial order, the great power order back. Now it's difficult to agree with him on that because a state, independent state should have the right to follow its course of action, its freedom. They want to join the European Union, what can you do? But there has to be an arrangement whereby Russia's security is not challenged. In any case, I'm not sympathizing with the West that much but I sympathize with Ukraine as a people, and you look at the intensity that they are suffering and fighting, because we cannot say that Ukraine has this no right to be independent, but everybody else that we have in India in particular fought for the independence from colonial imperial yoke, and then we also had support a lot of countries becoming independent. So there is a big challenge there normatively how to accept this phenomenon. Now, why I say the strong need not win. In Afghanistan for 10 years the Soviet Union was led, got out anonymously, destroyed that state, and then all the developments. The United States, more than almost 20 years, I believe, fought this extraordinary war, got out without winning. Yeah, very similar thing happened in the fall of Saigon, and when the United States rescued its people, the last flight taking off from both Kabul and Saigon. You guys probably remember the scenes that were horrible. In this latter case, one human being fell off the wing of the aircraft. But in the previous case also, people were climbing, and it's a very hard, wandering scene. Now, you look at all these interventionary wars, including India in Sri Lanka, Israel in Lebanon, US and Iraq. They may do a lot of physical damage, but they don't necessarily win. And that shows popular support is absolutely essential for winning any war in the 21st century. But the great powers rarely learn. They're dysfunctional learners. The reason being, they have the generational change. So Vietnam War, they call Vietnam Syndrome, learned a lot of lessons. The Americans military, they started creating the precision-guided munitions with the hope that the troops don't have to go in and so shoot those missiles from a distance. And that was their plan, but then Mr. Rumsfeld and Cheney and all thought, no, we are strong enough, we can take over Iraq rather quickly. Same with Afghanistan, and you know what happened. But the great powers retain their aura. United States in particular is far away from these theaters. Its home territory is not attacked. We are not like European power where the home territory is attacked. So they are so secure, they don't need to. Even in Russia's case also, the home territory is reasonably protected. But that's part of the challenge. The people sometimes don't feel the need for stopping the war because they can keep going. And a lot of other military-industrial complex phenomena working also. So Ukraine is in that situation. There is considerable destruction of its infrastructure, but it is unlikely to give it up easily. Why? If it gives it up, it will be lost as a nation state. Its independence will be gone. So if you are an Ukrainian, like I'm a Ukrainian, an Indian, if my country or country of origin is challenged like this, even if it means extraordinary suffering, what are you going to do? You will fight, as the Vietnamese did. So this is the problem. There is hardly anybody in Ukraine, as far as except for the Russian enclave population, sympathetic to this regime in Moscow. So how do you get that peace going if that's the situation? And that's a misreading. Great power learning is short because they have a lot of firepower. They're creating these modern war arsenal every day, and they are keeping it ready for use against the lower ranking states. And they need to test this once in a while so that the rank order will remain, equilibrium will remain, and they tell the world, we got it, A lot of social psychological, I'm actually working a book on status and conflict in international relations and so on. This is not a simple phenomenon. This is a power and status. And The other question, so what is the US doing? US is very good in proxy wars, as we all know, because US needs these proxies to fight. They cannot directly fight, there is mutual assured destruction. And it's also bringing the US extraordinary connection, relinking with the Europeans. Now the US is an indispensable alliance partner for NATO. None of them has the capacity to resist any of the Russia if there is intrusion. And the US, despite its extraordinary decline in domestic politics, democracy, etc., still has this grand strategy of global dominance, and that it will continue. So the only way to retain that dominance is to put Russia back into its regional status, and telling that to Chinese also, don't get into Taiwan, you will suffer. Part of it is trying to teach others a lesson, learning status positions. So where the problem is, Russia is trying to resurrect its great power status, decline, and it doesn't have many parameters or markers. What it has got is, as you know, oil and gas, some technologies, a lot of other things like weapons, even that weapons are questionable now. So it's resurrecting on the basis of a skewed capability mix, and that is not sufficient for a 21st century great power. Its population is declining, its main population's lifespan is lower than India's total lifespan, 71 minus 69 or something. And it's, I'm not completely sure the Indian data is correct, but we assume it is correct. How do we know? It's almost like saying, in Kottayam, there was a declaration, Kottayam is 100% literate. We have too many workers, and I was a kid, they still hand out never learned any literacy. And they are part of Kottayam, no? I mean, they are, I don't think anybody too 98 or something. Yeah, still coming. And there's also saying 100% electrification, which is that's very true. So I always take these numbers with a grain of salt, but the point is, the Russian male is dying faster than anybody else because they drink a lot of vodka, just gulp it, and they're not, you live there, their mentality. It's just a very sad situation. The family is dysfunctional often. Right. Now the United States has a lot of challenges here. Of course, it can give weapons, NATO can do so and so. And the NATO expansion to Finland and Sweden, that's a big achievement. These countries were dominantly neutral, for a long time, in World War II. So there is a problem of deterrence failing. What was Western expectation when pushing the Ukrainians to join this NATO thing, and kind of hoping that Russia will be deterred? The deterrence is the threat of punishment. And here I think it's more than deterrence by denial of victory. Russia won't win, therefore they won't start a war. But there is a deterrence working on the Russia-Poland border especially, that the nuclear weapons are allowing the Russians to do this intervention without being hit directly. Of course, this tanks business is one thing we can discuss. And the West is confident that Russia won't attack any of the NATO allies, because that will invoke Article 5, which is automatic defense of the allies. So there is a comfort zone, knowing that nuclear weapons prevent them from interfering in each other's conflict zones. And that is a big mistake, because escalation patterns in the past sometimes don't necessarily follow human brain. As we know, World War I, nobody thought the Archduke's assassination will spark this thing. But it's amazing how changes have taken place, of course, in calculations. So there is a problem of communication here, credibility, CQ, etc. The other problem is use of nuclear reactors, for instance, as hostages for gaining your objective, which is a big change in contemporary warfare. In the past, they would try to keep those reactors away, knowing that any spread of fissile materials or radiation would mean massive damage to the attacking country too. So, which is a kind of brinkmanship strategy that Russia is using. I think the Ukrainians are also positioning in such a way that get more attention there. Now, time horizon. There is a kind of phenomenon called time pressure on leaders. You feel that Putin is going through that, essentially saying, if I don't win back my empire, I won't have enough time. My time is finite. Xi Jinping probably is feeling the same thing. They all want to be remembered as glorious empire builders, Peter the Great style or Catherine the Great style. So you would be surprised if Jinping would do something in Taiwan, waiting for an opportunity. And so this time horizon is a big problem. And Putin is realizing that they are on a long-term status decline. And if they are not going to stop, Ukraine also falls, your dreams of creating the Soviet Empire back won't succeed. Ukraine, as you know, is the heart of the Soviet Empire, used to be. And so he has a short-term advantage. He had weapons, enough weapons, and economic money collected through gas sale, etc. And also they have been specializing in hybrid warfare, but I don't see much effective use of hybrid warfare in this thing. The other thing is ideological challenge, democracy promotion of the West, which he finds problematic. There have been a lot of Western intervention in Russian elections and vice versa, as we know, but the Western media won't report that. But it is very clear that the West was very trying to be working within the Soviet Russian electorate or people. And he has suppressed them all. He's very much like his Tsar today, confined in his barracks. But he has some capacity. And so there is a fear that he would be removed if there is too much democracy in Russia and return of democracy even in former Soviet republics. So it's very possible that he sensed Western weakness. Democracy was divided, easy to penetrate using social media, and American failure, of course, showing that US would just back off. So now or never situation. He's feeling time pressure. He is not driven by simple economic rationality or instrumental rationality. He is driven partially by value rationality, which is nationalism, ethnicity, religious pride, etc., which are different from typical rationality, which says you maximize your economic profit, wealth. And he's trying to resurrect the so-called civilizational state, which is an empire back. And so this is very similar, somewhat similar to Japan in 1939-40. Japan had a year and a half of oil to fight this huge empire. If you don't fight now, you lose. His calculation is slightly different, but the point is, he has already shown that you can use force in Syria and get away with it, for instance. Now, here, the war has now almost reaching first anniversary, and it is unlikely to end anytime soon. The reason being, there is kind of a stalemate, but is it hurting stalemate? Conflicts end when both parties are totally exhausted. There's no way you can win. Or one party gives it up. Conflict resolution story. Neither is going to be giving it up. Ukraine is getting the new tanks. That means if they are able to use them properly, they could make a dent in some of those conflicts. And Russia's failure to gain much territorial advance, all suggesting a kind of Vietnam type or Afghanistan type conflict could prolong with some escalation in between, even nuclear threats. Hopefully he won't use it. Using would be very disastrous because that will up the ante quite a bit and violate the Soviet Union was actually one of the most supporters of the traditional non-use of nuclear weapons or nuclear taboo, some call it. Only one or two occasions they invoked nuclear use. Whereas the United States has invoked it many times in Vietnam, in Korea, in Middle East. They have a tendency. So I did a book called The Traditional Non-Use of Nuclear Weapons, and the story is the American story, and the Russian story is very little, unless you have some archival there, but they were supporters of the no first use, etc. Now, Russia abandoning that is unfortunately already abandoned the no first use, and with unpredictable consequences for a taboo that really is worth it preserving for Russia also. So now, this escalation pattern, will it follow the 1914 pattern? Imagine if there were nuclear weapons, it would have probably. Other great powers would have encouraged. But I think I worry about the over-militarization of the international system as a result of this conflict. The China-Russia alliance is not forming rapidly, but which is a plus. I think the Chinese realize that this war is not in their interest, and they would lose the market the West provides if they form a military alliance, forcing others like India, Japan, and all form alliance with the United States. So alliance patterns could emerge in the 21st century, in the next decades, much more hard balancing, as we call it, versus contemporary soft balancing involving institutions and limited balancing, etc. Now, militarization is bad news because a lot of poorer countries will be sucked into this. Weapons will be sold. They will get involved in more and more of these proxy wars. Whenever great powers compete intensely, it's bad news for the rest of the world. Sometimes we ignore that. The IR theorists have made it very nicely. Systemic conflict, subsystemic fields are affected. But the effect is human beings are affected. Like look at the suffering in terms of food shortages and medicines, etc., supply chains. And so it's in the interest of everybody. I mean, Nehru was right. These great powers are violent actors. They need to be restrained. They need to be tamed. And you need ideas to tame them. And sometimes they have to lose wars. But as I said, losing does not make them learners. They come back again and again, to show their muscle power for status reasons. So we are in that situation, and the West is also not helping because the West is not giving Russia an exit because they somehow think they can win this. If they don't give an exit, what is Putin's way? I mean, unless there is a coup that removes him from power, which does not look like, what is the way out? But Russia had shown in the past Gorbachev phenomena, arrival of a leader with some new ideas. That could happen, but who knows? Now, the neighborhoods are massively affected, as you know, and so that's what I want to sort of sum up the great power competition, regional peace. And so there was a period of 3 decades long great power peace, and that was good for the intensified globalization to emerge. Think about the trade and economic growth, massive growth in investment, massive growth in expansion of global trade. And then, of course, even China adjusted its program, BRI, more like an economic sphere, competition for oil and all, but it did not generate intense conflict. Those who study power transitions argue that this is usually a phenomenon that occurs, realists in particular, because of the cycles in great power politics and the material capabilities change. When a powerful state emerges, if it's not given its status, it will try to force others to accept it. And so the regional order is where they play their games, the regions, because that's where they need allies, they need markets, they need status hierarchy created, spheres of influence and whatnot. So now we have a lot of theoretical understanding of this phenomenon, realism institutionalism, constructivism, critical theory, etc. Still that we need to know what notions like stability, instability, warm, stable peace, normal peace, Cold War, hot war, all these are tied to great power behavior. I'm not going to definitions at this point. But the point is, it is simply not feasible for a world order to emerge without great power peace. Great powers need to restrain themselves, others need to restrain them. And sometimes it can be done through institutions, through normative change, but often it's difficult because you can get these very cranky leaders. Here Russia is not alone. Think of the Rumsfelds and the Chinese suddenly deciding to go for very extraordinary warfare against a middle-ranking country that now is under Iraq. So, abandoning peace is a problem for them. They tend to sometimes sign peace, but they're also like, Tilly's argument of security racketeers. when police in here, Tilly argues that many police forces, not you guys, but in developing countries, are racketeers. Why? They create problem, security force, not police, security forces, military included. They create problems, make things insecure, and then they are called back to protect. So it's called protection racketeering. Now, nobody has used that concept in great power behavior. In fact, it's very true. Great powers create these problems in regions, and they are called back to protect. Protection racketeering. So read Tilly's argument about protection racketeering and this fascinating sociological arguments. So that's what is happening, and to some extent, they will not give it up because they like the status position. They are respected when they are bullies. They roam around the world, they get the best treatment in Delhi or wherever they go. If you are a nice person, unlikely to get that reception, of course, people will receive you, but not the states. Maybe I'm wrong, nice people do get. Okay, now what's the implication for India, South Asia? A prolonged attrition war is possible because, and it's probably will change the world order in unexpected ways. If alliances are formed between China and Russia, for instance, or if nuclear weapons are used, this will be major catastrophic event for the global order. So, on the other hand, there is some point that you need Russia as a pole, purely, not me. The reason being a pole is, otherwise these great powers tend to have, US gets too carried away, China, bipolarity is not good for India too. I think it is important to have a normal Russia with enough capacity to resist too much domination by China and United States. But that won't happen if Russia declines, which is a sad part. Putin is miscalculating. He should have put more emphasis on his development as a country and joining the globalization. Russia never joined the globalization process, economic globalization, because of this oil curse. Didn't need it, whereas China did. So China's behavior is tempered quite a bit because it cannot directly challenge, fearing that it would lose the markets in its economy. So it's doing these peripheral challenges, South China Sea or India border, but never crossing the threshold to create a major conflict. This Russian lack of participation means it will be isolated, and that isolation is bad for everybody. Now, economic consequences we know, going back and forth, shortages, food shortages. That may not be that bad if others pick it up, as is happening now, slowly. And of course, there will be turmoil in between. So what is the alternative? Why there is no leadership in the world today? UN Security Council is proving to be a totally inept institution. General Assembly has done a little better. G20, that's where India is putting a lot of its emphasis. What can it do? I read somewhere, I think I was Srinivasan saying that G20 should take over from UN Security Council because Security Council is more event. So creative leadership is needed. Let's hope our 1 year term here will produce that. I don't know, but it's clear that something better than the UN needs to come. Even BRICS system, BRICS, has not really done much. So G20 and BRICS are the only two institutions. There is SCO, but I don't think there will be much. Delicate diplomacy is needed between Europe, Russia, and United States. I think that is the big challenge. We don't have an individual leader with the capacity to bring people together. So even national leaders are almost weak as statesmen. And so there are a number of implications. And if Russia, hypothetically wins this conflict, then China would be probably more tempted to put pressure on India border and Taiwan to gain its goals. And I think, and the other big challenge is the domestic politics of these countries. So different coalitions, as you know, coalition politics could emerge. Some places could become non-democratic. A democratic so-called America could become more national security oriented. So a lot of groups that are clamoring for militarization of the world order can gain power. Number of unpredictable events could happen. But on the other hand, so far it is confined, it's a regional war, you don't feel it that directly, except when you fly from Canada to here, it's extra 1.5 hours to Delhi. So, which is, if you are in economy class, not the Western. But anyway, there is considerable fear of how to end these conflicts and how to bring back day powers into semblance of cooperation, even if they don't become peaceful actors, restrain them, tame them, their tendency to unnecessary wars, engage in unnecessary wars, and arming the world for their narrow national interests. Let me stop there. I don't know how long I took.
Thank you, sir. So now we'll open the floor for interaction.